Welcome again, friends, weirdlings, esteemed colleagues, and anthropologists. This is the Black Mass podcast with me, Theodore Bonaparte. I am the Theodore Bonaparte part, hence why I said me. Today's episode, we're heading south into the country of Francais for a very strange gentleman who went by the name of Marcel Petois, who also went by the name Captain Valery and Docteur Setin. We will jump straight in, shall we, without further ado. Born on January 17th, 1897, Petois very quickly caught the attention of school authorities with his tendency for violence and inappropriate sexual behavior. He fired his father's gun in class and propositioned a fellow student for sex at the age of 11. As a teenager, he began his criminal activity in earnest and found himself charged with theft and damage to public property after he robbed a postbox at age 17. His recommended sentence was psychological evaluation, the first of many times his mental state was officially evaluated. This time, as with his subsequent evaluations, a psychiatrist found him to be suffering from mental illness, and the charges against him were dropped. Isn't that wonderful? However, despite his diagnosis, he was drafted into the French army to serve during World War I. After being wounded at the front line in spring of 1917, he was again assessed to be mentally ill and sent for treatment. While in care, he was again arrested for theft, this time stealing army blankets. But once again the charges were dropped due to his obvious mental illness, which doctors diagnosed as mental disequilibrium, neurasthenia, mental depression, melancholia, obsessions, and phobias, and sent him to a psychiatric ward for treatment. However, apparently even this further confirmation of his mental illness did not exempt him from military service, as he was once again sent to the front the following year in 1918. So then he shot himself in the foot. Then after that he was transferred to another regiment after a few weeks of leave. The following year he was again sent for psychiatric evaluation, and his diagnosis meant that he was finally discharged from duty on disability. In fact, the report given to the military recommended that Petois be committed to an asylum. Instead, he was admitted to an accelerated education program set up for veterans, where he learned a medical degree and began his practice as a physician. What way to give a blatantly mentally ill person a new outlook on life is make him a doctor. Okay, now, after the war, armed with his credentials, Dr. Marcel Petois took up residence in the small village of Villeneuve-sur-Yonne. I apologize. I am so ignorant of these complicated words in other languages. Earning himself many new patients with his charming intelligence. He was a corrupt doctor, purposefully describing addictive substances to his patients and secretly applying for state and medical assistance for many of his patients, meaning that he received payment from both the patient and the state each time he treated them. Very clever man. He began an affair with the daughter of one of his patients in 1926. Louise Delaveau, who appeared in suspicious circumstances, who disappeared, I do apologize, there's quite a difference there, who disappeared in suspicious circumstances during their relationship, including accusations leveled by his neighbors that saw Dr. Petois putting a large trunk in his car, one that looked a lot like a trunk filled with an unidentified woman's body parts that the police pulled out of the Yonne River a few weeks later. Police claimed that this was coincidence, and Delaveau was officially logged as a runaway. Wow. Despite this recent scandal that tied him to a murder, Dr. Petois won the mayorship of Villeneuve-sur-Yonne not long after. He became a mayor. Jesus Christ. In 1927 he married Georgette Lablais, and they had a son the following year. His tendency as mayor was fraught with scandal, as you can very well imagine. He was accused of stealing everything from taxpayer money to cans of oil from the railroad department. The latter saw him head to court once again, where he was fined and sentenced to 3 months in prison, but the sentence was overturned in an appeal. His suspension from the office of mayor lasted 4 months, and only after several more years of complaints and accusations of theft, he was officially removed from office in 1931. Just over a month after he was removed as mayor of Villeneuve-sur-Yonne, he won a seat on the General Council of the Yonne district, the youngest man ever to sit in that office. During his time in the council, he was charged with the theft of electric power. He was charged with the theft of electric power from the town. He was fined and lost his seat on the council. He stole electricity. After this event, he moved to Paris. In 1933, now settled in Paris, Dr. Petois set about growing his medical practice. He built a very successful medical practice, and by all outward appearances he was a doctor with an impeccable reputation. However, rumors persisted that he was again prescribing to addicts, and that also he performed illegal abortions. Plus, he couldn't keep his kleptomania under control. He was again arrested for theft and assault of a police officer, and was again acquitted because of insanity. He spent a few months in a sanitarium, but was once again released despite the doctor's doubts as to his sanity. In the following years, he repeatedly committed tax fraud and was once again charged and fined for his crimes. By the time Germany invaded France in 1939, he had a pretty hefty criminal record and a laundry list of psychiatric diagnoses. When the Germans settled in France, Dr. Petois established himself as a member of the resistance, but doubts remain as to how actively he was involved. He first began providing false medical records for French citizens who were forced into German labor camps and treating the sick workers who returned, then found himself charged and convicted of overprescribing narcotics in 1942. After paying a fine, he then took on the alias of Dr. Eugene and set up a false escape network for resistance fighters, Jews and criminals looking to escape the Gestapo. He claimed that his network, Flytox, worked in conjunction with Argentinian authorities to safely transport people to South America without the knowledge of the German invaders. What actually happened, though, was rather horrific. I can't even say horrific today. What actually happened, though, was rather horrific indeed. Under the guise of inoculating them against various diseases as demanded by the Argentinian government, Dr. Petois injected them with cyanide, stole their money and possessions, and disposed of their bodies in quicklime, buried them or disposed of them in the Seine River. When the Gestapo found out about this organization, they infiltrated it and arrested and jailed Petois and his accomplices. When they were unable to crack what they imagined was an extensive network of spies, in fact, Petois, his wife, and 3 accomplices, they released him. By this time, January 1944, the war was on its last legs, and the Germans had other things to worry about. But due to complaints of a disgusting smoke coming from his practice in Paris, the Parisian police stumbled on at least 10 bodies buried in his basement. Luckily for Dr. Petois, they believed his story about the bodies being those of traitors and Germans, and they released him. He promptly went into hiding, living with one of his patients, where he changed his name to Henri Valery, and he joined the French forces of the interior. or the FFI, rising to the rank of captain very quickly. When the newspaper Resistance ran a story about Petois that fall, accusing him of collaborating with the German occupiers, police once again began their search for Petois, in earnest, drafting none other than Captain Henri Valery to search for the fugitive. So they hired Henri Valery, who was Petois, to search for Petois. Oh dear. A month later, on October 31st, Halloween, 1944, he was recognized and arrested in the Paris metro. Dr. Marcel Petois' defense rested on his claim to be a resistance fighter. While he admitted to killing enemies of France, he claimed to have no knowledge of how the bodies ended up buried at his house. He claimed that members of his Flytox organization must have killed them and buried them without his knowledge. However, the judge and jury didn't find any reason to believe his stories. It's about bloody time, chaps. And Dr. Marcel Petois was charged with 27 murders, but claimed to have killed a total of 63 Germans and collaborators between 1940 and 1945. He was found guilty of 27 murders and 99 other criminal charges and sentenced to death by guillotine. His last words before his decapitation on May 25th, 1945 were, "Gentlemen, that's a Russian accent. I'm not even going to try and do a French accent. Gentlemen, I ask you not to look. This will not be very pretty." Thus ended the reign of terror of Dr. Setain, and one of the most incredible stories of an unparalleled criminal career. Amazing. And they have a picture of him at the guillotine. That is wonderful. Well, children, what on earth did you think of that? Quite an amazing career, don't you think? We'll see you next time for more Black Mass Children.